Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to do another episode of Occulted, and we're going to talk about leadership and the idea of what is a leader, what is a king, what is this idea we have about who should lead, why, what does it look like, particularly through the epochs. So we're going to take a look at leadership and the idea of really a king, a sort of priest king throughout Lemuria, ancient Atlantis, and even getting into the post-Atlantean period. And we're going to kind of chronicle that and look for patterns and compare and contrast to get a really good understanding of the sort of situation that we're sitting in our culture. Like, where do we get this idea of there being a chief, a chieftain, right? It's not just like in the West where you have a president or a prime minister or something. We've had this idea of a clan leader, a tribal leader since humanity began. And over the epochs, this idea of the chieftain, of the clan leader, the tribal leader, has only become more and more complex, and more, I guess you could say, participatory, as individuals. So I wanted to move into this topic because it's perfect as we move into Leo this week. We are moving into Leo. And I think that this conversation moves really great with that. But also because one of the things that I've been seeing personally is the importance of leadership, really in the next, I would say, maybe 7 years, 6, 7 years, and that the presidential race in America in 2028 is going to be a particularly important event for the world. And so I think to prepare for that, we have to kind of get down to the roots of what leadership is, what it should be, right? Because we're coming into a lot of chaos in the world, and these kind of vacuums are appearing, and we need to have a very strong understanding of leadership from a spiritual perspective to really be able to navigate this properly. We need to understand the roots of the structure that we're even in, you know, beyond even our memory of it, actually. And so, one of the things that we're coming up against is something that I talk about on my channel a lot, which is the reality that with this rushing forward of technology by these different technocrats and these different institutions, it's really placing humanity in this really tough position where if the technology is not stewarded properly, if this advanced technology of across different mediums, whether it be from AI to surveillance technology to satellites to space travel, if these very advanced and complex technologies are not stewarded properly, it will be the end of humanity's freedom as we know it. And it will be very, very difficult to sort of claw and cling things back. Once, you have a high surveillance grid set in space, working through something like Donald Trump's Golden Dome or certain technologies that can be put on the moon and Mars. Once you get these incredible nets, really, these kind of Skynet, very advanced technologies that involve particle colliders and black sun technology, it affects human beings on the level of consciousness and the level of soul. And it's very, very difficult once that happens to create awakening in the human being. So technology can be introduced to the public in a way that is nourishing, where it's a tool, where it allows actually for spiritual development. If we have, even language models, you have computers, you have technology that can give you more time to contemplate, to meditate, to do things that are nourishing for your family, for your soul. It gives you that time so you're not toiling all the time. Not that toiling is bad, but when you only are struggling to survive all the time, there also can be no existential thought, and the individual is not at peace enough to grow. So it's not really about being a Luddite and saying, oh, you can never use AI, or oh, you can never have like a camera in front of your house, you can't have these advanced technologies. It's really just about knowing what the dangers are, knowing what they could become, how they can be used negatively, and avoiding the situation where we are ushered into basically a technate, and it's introduced to us as this utopia, never having to work again, never having to do anything difficult. It's this Faustian bargain, and then getting trapped in it to the point that when these different technologies are used, and I'm talking about not just the idea of particle colliders and their effect on the soul and the electromagnetic body, but also things to do with space colonization and space travel, where the actual planets like the moon and Mars can be used in a very can be used in a way that kind of creates this net around the earth so that certain spiritual forces begin to prey upon the earth. So we're really in a very challenging time. And when it comes to the next, basically from now until 2033 is a big, big, big deciding point for humanity, because we can either create the right stewardship of these topics, of these technologies, and we can have a free and open culture and a free and open civilizations in the world, or we can give that away and it can begin to erode from here to the point that we will have to fight for every single inch of freedom, because once these technologies are in place, things like Donald Trump's Golden Dome, this can be presented to us as though it's like some kind of heroic missile defense system. And of course, there's all this war going on that shouldn't even be going on anyway, totally barbaric stuff that we need it for. So produce a lot of war, and then all of a sudden we need this Golden Dome. We need these free energy devices that are not properly understood as well. And so we're kind of coming into this problem, reaction, solution thing that can be absolutely devastating for humanity and the spiritual life of humanity on an objective level, if not stewarded properly. Because once these technologies get going, they produce a kind of radiation, electricity, and magnetism in high doses that actually affects the bioenergetic field of the human being. It competes with it. And I've talked about this extensively on this channel, especially in my video called, it's not the War of All Against All, it's called Electric Apocalypse. And I've talked about this repeatedly on my channel. You can just Google, just search in my channel for different keywords. I've timestamped everything here. So this is something that we really have to get serious about, no matter how much we're fighting for, these mundane things like to avoid economic collapse. We have to look at the food supply. We're in this really dire situation. We cannot lose track of the spiritual issues and the technological intersection with the human soul. Because when you have these technologies that use huge amounts of electricity, of magnetism, and radiation, and use particle colliders, you use all of these things, you place them on the moon, you start doing this, you're actually creating a different environment for the earth. And you're actually kind of enslaving the earth and humanity in these discordant frequencies. It's kind of actually like a real prison that you create. The earth itself is not a prison, right? The earth itself is not a prison, but if you want to use all of these technologies in space and on the moon and on Mars and in the atmosphere, then you absolutely will create a kind of prison for humanity, and the soul will find, the future generations will find it very difficult to connect with their soul. So what we're looking at is that the 2028 election matters a whole lot. And you're going to be hearing people tell you, feed you like 1,000,001 black pills as to why it doesn't matter and why you shouldn't participate. But the reality is that this is probably the most pivotal one that we will face, because this president is going to be legislating on all the difficult issues around technology. Not only that, many of the issues that we faced from the tyrannical side of things, in the sense of like the health crisis that we faced in 2020, a lot of intense crimes from, a certain person's black book. All of these things are reaching a certain point of maturity. A lot of topics that have been in the black and that people have been putting hours and hours and hours into arguing for are finally actually reaching a point of maturity, and they will reach a point of maturity in the 2028 election. And that president is going to be somebody who is going to have to lead on that. And so if you get one of these quintessential politicians that's going to be, backed by, some tech bro or whatever, or, is backed in the sense that they're just doing, the dirty work of these tech overlords, and it should be reversed, right? Like humanity and the politicians should be restricting and deciding their fate in regards to these technologies. And we should be cutting back the deep state. We should be doing this. And we absolutely have the foundation for it. We have laws. We have a Bill of Rights that doesn't allow any of this to happen. It's not being enforced. It's not being carried out. A lot of the agencies that exist are extra constitutional. They should not exist. A lot of what's going on should not technically be happening or exist, and is happening specifically in humanity's ignorance and cowardice in many ways. And so we need to understand that the election coming forward is very important for humanity, because the American the American political system is going to be kind of the point where it leads on this for reasons obviously people already know. So this is where a lot of the technocrats are going to find that they've already introduced their language models, their AI. They've already sort of infiltrated the government with some of their stuff, and they've gone through this kind of blossoming and growth phase where we're working with it, and now it has to get to the next level. Now all of these people that want to create a technate, they need to solidify what they have and what they've done. They need to truly, truly consolidate. We're no longer at the phase of introducing things and hopes and dreams with technology. We're at a point now where they need to make it as official as possible to lock it in. That's why this matters. And that's why legislation matters, because you may not want to go to the voting booth, and that's fine. I understand that, whatever. It's not what I'm talking about. But the reality is that legislation matters. Things either get passed or they don't get passed, and your voice matters, and how your participation matters, right? If everybody could come together around certain topics, it wouldn't exist anymore. Certainly people who have amassed a lot of wealth are powerful. For sure they are. But they're not more powerful than an informed and activated public. They're just not. Nobody is. And if you think that they are, then you have fallen into depression and black pill and hopelessness and listlessness, which is exactly what they want. We do have power, actually. And we've actually, as people, we've confronted way more challenging, dangerous things or similar things in the past and have overcome it. So this is our challenge. So they've introduced their AI, they're introducing all these data centers, the Golden Dome. A lot of people want to say, like, there's a good tech bro and a bad tech bro. I guess maybe they have these different things, but at the level of this technate, I think that they're all ultimately battling for the same position. And they'll just go whatever political way they need to in order to secure their power, right? Because wanting a technate, it negates human freedom fundamentally, on a fundamental level. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So we need to make sure that these technologies, and again, a lot of them are just not evil. I wouldn't say that. They're tools. We need to make sure, as the public, that they blossom in the world in a way that's healthy and productive, and that's not infringing on our freedom. Okay. So many of the issues that have been seeded, whether it be these issues with the health crisis, all of the vast issues with technology, the wars on different fronts, all of these things, the Epstein client list, all of these things are going to start to come to a head from, our period basically in 2028 onward to 2033. And so we cannot give up on the system that we have, because we need to use it in order to get past this, right? So it's kind of like our test. So we need to have leadership, essentially, that has freedom-based legislation that enables human flourishing and freedom and rejects modern forms of tyranny. There's all these modern forms of tyranny that, in the case of America, the founding fathers couldn't have exactly imagined, but I do think that they accounted for obviously tyranny in general and have set that foundation. But we need to now have the right legislation to protect humanity and protect ourselves from these new forms of tyranny and people who have committed crimes against humanity in their many different forms and have been manipulating the system and doing all this really sick stuff. We do need to see justice there. So this is actually a very important time. Okay. So now let's get to the sort of esoteric, occult level of this conversation, which is we're going to be asking the question today, what makes a leader? Specifically, what would make a leader or a king in the early period of humanity? So I'm talking about like pre-incarnation of Christ, very early humanity, and even going back into the Atlantean epoch and the Lemurian epoch. That is how big of a spread we're going to do today. So what actually would make a leader? What would make a king, actually, in the Lemurian period, in the Atlantean period, and even the first half of our post-Atlantean period? Okay, so in occultism, the Earth is divided up into 7 distinct epochs that have sort of different conditions, and the human being in the Earth is becoming more complex every epoch, building upon it in what's called a recapitulation. And so the Lemurian epoch is basically like the Eden period. The Atlantean epoch is after the Eden period, and we're actually in the post-Atlantean epoch. And every planetary epoch has great civilizations. There's about 7 great cultural epochs, or 7 great civilizations in every single epoch. So like the Lemurian epoch has 7 great cultures. The Atlantean epoch would have 7 great cultures. And our post-Atlantean period has 7 great cultures. And we're in the 5th great culture of that post-Atlantean period. So we can use the Platonic year or Plato's great year to track, like a big clock, the development of the planet and the development of humanity, actually very, very precisely. One of my pet peeves with esotericism in modern times is the ignorance of this, is the ignorance of the fact that we can actually trace humanity back to our very beginning very precisely. And there's no need to necessarily have this big blank area or guess or create this chaos because we can't figure out what our ancient past is, right? Or we can't figure out how the cosmos works. It's like, that's actually not, that comes from intense spiritual ignorance and a materialistic mind that just cannot operate in a meaningful way when it comes to the entire scope of creation. Okay. So we're going to examine what a leader, what a king is in the Lemurian epoch, in the Atlantean epoch, and in the post-Atlantean epoch. And then from that, I think we'll be able to deduce, where we actually get the structure of leadership we have now, because even the creation of like the Senate in Rome, the American system, even going back into the Indian systems of governance, in the Eastern systems, they're all sort of building up and continuing to create a kind of society that is freedom oriented, that has a population of individuals that are self-aware, self-conscious, and working towards their own spiritualization, working towards their own immortality. And we can see, as you're going to see in this talk today, we can actually trace that from the very beginning of of humanity's existence on the earth to present day, which is where we begin as a kind of hive mind. We begin in a very tribal way of existing. And then over time, we begin to get closer and closer to individuation. And then we reach the midpoint of planetary develop approximately, which Rudolf Steiner calls the turning point in time. And we get the incarnation of Christ, which is God and man. And then that kicks off the individuation process. That's how we look at that in esoteric Christianity. And so this is the lens in which we're going to be sort of viewing that through today. If you do want more information on that, I have several lectures on atavism and the condition of the earth before the incarnation, or the condition of the earth in the earlier phases of our epoch, our present epoch, going back into Atlantis, going back into Lemuria. Again, there's really no need to have any serious, there's no need to have any chaos about our ancient past. We really don't have to have that. We do have incredible individuals that have left direct teachings for us. And we just have a whole history, a very beautiful history, a very beautiful spiritual lineage of these things being recorded and talked about on a fundamental archetypal level to personal accounts. It's all there for us if we just choose to integrate it. Okay. So we're also going to look at how the role of a leader kind of evolves and shifts over the epochs as well. I'm probably going to have to do this maybe in 2 different occulted episodes, because I probably won't be able to get to everything that I want to cover today. But let's just start out with the very basics of leadership, which is, what was a king classically? And we have to understand here that when we're going to talk about what a king was in the beginning of humanity, all of the governance and leadership styles is building upon this one truth, because the pattern recapitulates and gets more complex as humanity individuates, right? So we're going to start with this concept, and it's going to reach more and more complexity. And it's fun, actually, especially in the comments. It's actually really fun to kind of do the calculus yourself, do the math yourself, and figure out, okay, well, if I have these basic tenets, then I can figure out how things are shifting over time. You can start to think in a way that is spiritual just by understanding the foundation. Okay, just by understanding the basic patterns and teachings. And we call that spiritual science, right? Spiritual science, in the sense of anthroposophy, it's not about being given a set of teachings. It's not dogmatism. It's you actually engaging in the process of figuring this out using your organs of spiritual perception, using your organs of thought, using your will. So it's actually not a teaching, right? It's not the teachings of Rudolf Steiner. It's not the teaching of anthroposophists, right? It is a process that you engage in. The anthroposophia, the wisdom in the human being that you are able to bring forth through you developing internally, developing your mind, developing your spirit. It allows you to engage in spiritual cognition and regain spiritual sight and spiritual capacity. That's what we're talking about here when we talk about spiritual development. It's not a new age sense. This is not a new age channel. Okay. So what is a king? What is the foundation here? Well, really interestingly, if you were talking about a king in, say, the Lemurian epoch, right? Or even the Atlantean epoch, and even up until our own, about halfway through, you are actually looking at a very specific individual. This individual would have been actually a priest king. So if you wanted to rule in the truest sense of the word, you had to be not only a king, meaning somebody who is bringing the law, somebody who is leading the public, somebody who is self-sacrificing, somebody who is taking on the public's concerns. Not just that, not just a decision maker. You had to be a spiritual initiate. You had to be a shaman. You had to be somebody who was a priest, the highest priest. For most of humanity's history, that was what a leader was. A leader was a priest king. That's very obvious with the idea of the Egyptian pharaohs. They literally called them a priest king. And you're looking at the Babylonian, Chaldean, Egypto epoch, right? Which is right before the incarnation of Christ there. So that's how long this was going on. And you can still see the pattern up until 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. We're still doing it. We still remember it. We have the Egyptian priest kings. You have the reality that even in like shamanic tribes, it is the chief would actually also be the shaman. The tribal leader was the head magician, and they were leading the tribe because you actually couldn't have any capacity to lead unless you were united with an angel. That actually gave you the capacity to lead. What does that mean? It means that there would be an individuality, and this individual would be united with a very high angel, probably a solar angel of a certain order, right? The solar angel of any type of the hierarchies is like the theophanic. It is the highest angel of whatever hierarchy you're looking at. So you have an individual who interlaced with their spiritual body is a very high angel. And this angel is working through that individual. And that individual is sort of doing this very challenging process, trying to be as present and awake as possible and allowing this to happen. And there's lots of different pieces of literature about this, about like the sun hero, the priest of Apollo, the idea of the sun initiate. And this really peaks with the incarnation of Jesus. So you get the incarnation of Jesus, and you get sort of the highest, you get the highest degree of giving oneself up for humanity, which is that the Christ actually enters into Jesus at 33 years old at the baptism in the Jordan, in the River Jordan. So that is sort of the culmination or the highest point of that early process in humanity. It kind of culminates into the incarnation of the Christ, which is God in Jesus. And then Jesus then through that process redeems humanity. Because when God enters man, it's a whole different ballgame. When God enters man, it enters every man, right? Because of the template level in which we exist and are connected to on the etheric level. Okay? So it starts out in Lemuria and Atlantis, and even up until the incarnation of Christ and Jesus, it starts out with leadership being overshadowed by progressively higher angels as humanity itself becomes more and more complex and moves towards individuation. So a leader then in Atlantis, in Lemuria, and in even the earlier periods of our own post-Atlantean era. When does the post-Atlantean era begin? About 7,000 BC. Okay, we track the post-Atlantean era begins roughly at 7,000 around there BC. And then it moves into our modern time. But when you get the incarnation, that's when everything officially shifts. And humanity enters a really kind of different track of development where these patterns recapitulate, but on an inner level of of work, which we'll probably get into in the next video, but just to get the structure today. So in these earlier periods, you would have a king, you'd have a leader, and they would be an exalted individuality. And you can tell in our modern culture, you can kind of see the remnants of this, where sometimes you'll get these leaders and they'll kind of bring up this echo of the old humanity, of ancient humanity, and they'll kind of say that they're an avatar. Very famously, there was deep esoteric societies around Adolf Hitler, and they were saying that he is the Kalki. I think they also believed that he was the Maitreya Buddha, and that he was this great figure, sort of reincarnated to lead the world. You can see a lot of the founding fathers using a Freemasonic or Rosicrucian outline, where that initiation structure initially, before these systems got super perverted, was trying to preserve and mirror the idea of taking on a higher and higher angel as you purified yourself and as you became increasingly moral. And there's very, very strict rules around what it takes for a human being to actually be able to, in their energy bodies, in their astral body, in their etheric body, and even in their physical body, to be able to sustain an angel. The issue is that it takes a lot of purification and a lot of direct development and service to actually be able to contain a high spiritual being like this. It just would sort of destroy the energetic sheaths of most people. So you actually have to build yourself up to be able to even do this. It would be incredibly painful. The energy sheaths, the etheric body, the astral body, the physical body actually have to be prepared for this. And not in one life, but life after life after life, through the process of death and rebirth. In that process, in the heavenly realms, the human being is further prepared until eventually they can, in their earthly life, actually take on this extremely powerful angel. And this angel then works through the individual, and that individual is able to then lead the public. But the individual is not leading from his own free will. He's not doing what he wants, right? He's not doing something to further himself. He's not looking to invest in a bunch of like illegal things with his station, through his station. He's there in a sacrificial way, where he's actually given up his life. And there's a female aspect of this as well, which I will not be getting into today. We're just going to talk about male leadership in this one. But he's giving up his entire, you have to understand, he is giving up his entire life for this. So to be a king, to be a priest king, you have to give up your own desire. And that's why it's difficult, is because to do that, you therefore have to have a purified desire, or it's going to be very painful for you, right? Now, nobody's perfect, okay? Nobody is perfect and never having a desire. This process of taking on an angel is not about perfection. Very flawed people have had very high angels work through them. And it's the fact that they have this actually, the truth is, it's the fact that they have this crazy powerful angel that's united with them is why they have so many strong desires. It's why they struggle so much sometimes with these addictions or sometimes with these different things, is because there's this existential pressure on them that's actually magnifying all of this stuff inside of them so that they can purify it and overcome it. So we're not looking necessarily at people, especially in our post-Atlantean age, where these individuals are like perfect, like the Buddha. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about imperfect people that are often suffering, but that bear an angel and that augments their suffering, that they kind of fight through for humanity. They fight through this position that they're in for humanity. So it's not about perfection. It's about people doing it and gritting their teeth through it, actually. Okay. So there's a lot of examples of even some of the stuff with like even like American politicians. I know Donald Trump was posting a lot of photos of himself like as Jesus, as this sort of spiritual figure. I'm sure there's been ones on the Democrat side as well. I'm not trying to pick on any one side in particular, but I know recently there was that, kind of controversial image. So there is this capacity for people to spiritualize leaders, especially if individuals are operating in a very atavistic portion of their consciousness, meaning that if an individual isn't self-aware and they haven't reached a level of self-consciousness and individuation, like individuated from the family, individuated from the tribe, and are working on knowing themselves, sometimes they'll revert to strictly atavistic patterns. And that means that they'll just impulsively, compulsively carry on these ancient patterns of the human being that don't really reflect where we're going. And so people will just worship a politician. They'll just worship them because deep in their mind, they remember when, back in the day, in order to actually have that position and actually be in that position, you had to be noble. There was no even being in a public position unless you were noble. You would not attain that because of how humanity and the earth was structured in this natural sort of hive with the spiritual hierarchies, with the angels. The angels led humanity. Every aspect of humanity was led by angels. Humanity was not self-aware, was not an individual yet. Okay? So certain people would be raised up and the angel would work through them, and people would follow them and had a reverence for them. And so people who are not yet self-aware will feel extremely religiously. They may not say it that way, but it's clearly like a religion. They feel that way about politics. They feel that way about politicians. They have religious and spiritual reactions to politics, to public office, to governance. They think governance is going to solve every single one of their problems. It can just be legislated. Everything can. There's an atavistic quality of worshiping leaders, because back in the day, for the vast majority of human development, we did. And it was appropriate to do so because these were not just regular people. They were the vehicle for an angel, a higher spiritual being. Okay. So that's the beginning of humanity. That's why we see all this kind of religiosity and these different political leaders being conflated with incredible saviors and spiritual figures, even though in our particular time period, it doesn't apply. We actually no longer live in a time where humanity operates as a collective tribal hive mind and needs an angel to lead humanity through a person. We are individuals now. You're an individual. Your task is to individuate. And moving forward, we have to actually create civilization so that everybody is free to do that, which is why I opened this conversation with, listen, we are coming into a very challenging time because we need to protect the individuation process and the freedom of humanity right now, because there is these different individuals that want to create a technate so that you get addicted to technology and afraid and you need it to protect you and all this kind of stuff. But really, you'll never think your own thought again because you're going to have all this stuff going on in space. It's the ultimate final Ahrimanic enclosing of the human soul so it no longer develops, right? So it doesn't help that people have these atavistic assumptions about politicians and about Hollywood celebrities as well. It goes back into early humanity. Like, you would not be in any position of authority, even on an entertainment level, unless you had some kind of angel working through you. It may not be like the highest angel, but like you would have to have a higher entity working through you to even be in that position. Now you can have people in Hollywood, in politics, in whatever big tech, and they can have the opposite thing going on. They can be actually pretty demonic in what's going on in their soul, and they can enjoy the same status, the same public exposure that wouldn't even be possible for them in the Lemurian period, really, or the Atlantean period. Now, there were dark ages. There were dark ages in Lemuria, and there were dark ages in Atlantis, but it didn't function in the same way that it does now. In those periods, you would just go through a time in which fallen angels would influence humanity, but humanity was not yet individuated. So it was kind of more like seasons. But now we have a totally different track and a totally different task where we actually get to determine, because everybody is an individual, together what our leadership is and where the world is going, to what degree, which was never possible until now, which is why it's so important to preserve that process for humanity and why there's so many efforts to stop it and to discourage you from it. Okay, so the original idea of a leader was a priest king, a shaman chief. And in order to actually rule, especially in a golden age, a higher point in these cultures, the real structure is given during the golden age, or during the high point of Lemuria, during the high point of Atlantis, and then it declines. So the real point of leadership, not the dark era where fallen angels start to influence humanity based on what they don't understand, but the real sense of a leader was an individual that was both a king, meaning providing governance, law, leadership in the mundane sense of the word, but also a shaman, also a priest. So they would have had an angel, a very high spiritual being that was fused in and interlaced with their spiritual bodies. They were literally a medium for a higher being. That's what they were. Okay. And in this way, the leader, their physical form would be normal. So they would have a normal human body, whatever the form looked at that time, but then overshadowing the individual, you would see the angel. You would see the different colors. You would see that there was an angel working through him. So, in those earlier times when humanity was clairvoyant and could see the energy behind a tree, could see the energy behind a river, could see the energy behind a person. I mean, you knew exactly what somebody was. You knew exactly where somebody fit in society. You knew exactly where somebody fit in the civilization, because their aura revealed that to you. You could tell by looking at them what their place was, what their talents were, what their level of initiation was. And everything just moved harmoniously because we had that clairvoyance to see that. We have lost that clairvoyance because we had to exchange that to become an individual. And we then get materialism and we fall into this deep sense of natural science and materialism. We lose the clairvoyance, develop the intellect, and now we have to get it back, which is where we are now. So the leader would also work on behalf of both the hierarchies and humanity. So you have a priest king, and the priest king he's working on behalf of humanity. So he's providing the right guidance, introducing the right customs, introducing the right initiating principles for the age. He's like the chief initiate. And then you also have him working on behalf of the hierarchies as well, because what's going on is actually a lot of sort of gymnastics and kind of calculus in that, this individual you have to figure out with the faculties you have how to do these things. And that gets more and more challenging as humanity develops and becomes more intellectual, becomes more complex, develops more of these organs. Suddenly, it gets a little bit more challenging to interpret these things from the angel. And we fall deeper and deeper into darkness, deeper and deeper into sin. And that makes it harder. And so you can see how something can begin very pure and we get that template, but then things kind of get more and more complex, which explains the trouble with leadership we have now. All right, so I'm going to now read to you Rudolf Steiner talking about this principle. So I'm going to read Rudolf Steiner's perspective on this in regard to Lemuria, and then Atlantis, and then the post-Atlantean period. And this is from the Spiritual Hierarchies lecture, GA 110. And I think these are all from the April 16th lecture. Okay. So in Lemuria, and remember, in classical Christianity, Lemuria is the Eden period. Eden is Lemuria, and Lemuria is Eden. Okay. So in Lemuria, the leaders of humanity were penetrated by an archai, or a spirit of personality, or spirit of Venus. Now, in Rudolf Steiner's work, you're going to hear him using a bunch of different terms for the same spiritual being or the same kind of angel. He does that for a reason. Archai is a classical definition that was used in the Pauline stream from the Celestial Hierarchies work. And so that is the archai. But then he will also say spirits of personality or spirits of twilight for the different angels. That's letting you know the essence of what is the nature of the angel. Because archai doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the essence the way that spirits of this, spirits of that does. And then he'll also say spirits of Venus, spirits of Mercury, spirits of the moon, which is letting you know the region of the cosmos in which these angels exist relative to man. So the different language is there for a reason. It is telling you, first of all, the classical Greek, and sometimes, I think it's Greek, the Greek, then it's giving you the description of the nature of the angel, and then it's giving you the planetary orientation or where it is in the cosmos. That's why they have different names. Okay, it's telling you, it's approaching it from a different angle every single time. Okay, so here we're talking about here the archai, which are also called the principalities. They're also called the spirits of personality. They're also called the spirits of the age, or the zeitgeist, I believe. And they're also called the spirits of Venus. Okay, so that's a lot of different names, but as I said, every single name denotes something different about the spiritual being, depending on where you're entering the conversation from. So there's a reason for it. All right. So in Lemuria, the leaders of humanity were penetrated by an archai, or a spirit of the personality, or a spirit of Venus. Different language for the same angel. Okay. So outwardly, such Lemurians did not differ particularly from their fellow beings, but because a spirit of personality resided vicariously within their physical body, these select individuals exerted a suggestive influence on their surroundings in the highest sense of the word. The respect, reverence, and obedience shown towards them, there's nothing comparable to that today. All migrations undertaken on the earth to populate its various regions were led by such beings into whom spirits of the personality had entered, or the archai, spirits of the archai had entered, right here, top of the third hierarchy, leading Lemuria. No language was needed. It did not exist back then, nor were signs required. The mere presence of such a personality was sufficient. And when they deemed it necessary to lead large masses of people from one place to another, these masses followed without giving it a second thought. Reflection did not exist back then either. It only developed later. Thus did the spirits of personality descend as Venus spirits in the ancient Lemurian era. And we can therefore say that these Venus spirits who wore human form on Earth, as human form could be at that time, meant something quite different from within the context of the entire cosmos. If one considers their cosmic significance, it extended all the way up to Venus, and their actions had meaning within the entire context of the cosmic system. Okay, so when he gives the realm, saying that angel is extending its body all the way up to Venus, he is saying that it is united with the human being, but if you were to look at that human being, there's an essence of a being, of an angelic being behind them that's extending all the way up to the planet Venus, where it is rooted, okay? And a lot of this stuff, again, is like people will go back into different spiritual texts that are talking about angels that are rooted in the realm denoted by Venus, and they're telling you it's like a Nordic alien or something like that, or a spirit that has passed through the Pleiades, that is like a physical alien in a ship or something. These are deformations of this topic that I'm talking about right now. And I discussed that in my lecture called Angels to Aliens and the Dark Side of Disclosure. So when I'm saying Venus here, and we're going to talk about Mercury and the moon, we are not talking about aliens in a nuts and bolts spaceship that is flying to the earth to create humanity in a petri dish or something. Like the Elohim are aliens or whatever. We are talking about a very specific relationship with angels. And it's important because of what we're talking about today. We have to understand how the angels overlap with humanity. And I also have an entire course on this right here called Your Guardian Angel and Spirit Guides, where I discuss this, the interface with angels in detail. And I even delineate out the difference between an angel, a difference between spirit guides. I just finished that. We just did the Q&A last week, but all of that material is there for you as well. Just the kind of spiritual physics of the thing. So they were able to guide people from one place to another because they knew this from the context that could be understood when one is familiar with the Earth's surroundings and not just the Earth itself. So, in other words, the hierarchies kind of had to guide humanity in this early period because humanity really is, in this early time, unconscious largely, and needing to express and have these cosmic impulses basically trained into them, etched into their spiritual bodies. And they need to be in certain places on the earth because the earth is kind of like a body in itself. And there's certain kind of almost like ley lines and acupuncture places on the earth in which humanity has to be located at certain times. So looking back into our past, you have these incredible like temple builder civilizations and things like that build a temple and then disappear. Yes, because certain things need to happen on the earth at certain times and certain people will be led there, which means that, if you have a certain group living in a certain continent, they may not have been the person that built that structure. Maybe they were, but maybe they weren't, because there were always these migrations moving around as these different groups would go to these different places. Okay. So keep that in mind. Again, that is from GA 110. This is from the April 16th lecture. Okay. So now let's get into the leaders of humanity in the Atlantean period. Now remember that humanity by the Atlantean period is starting to become much more complex. We have completely physicalized. The elements are in a little bit of a different condition than they are in the post-Atlantean period. But by and large, humanity is just beginning to learn to do calculations, just beginning to learn to think, just beginning to become intellectual. And that is sort of the peak of that Atlantean period. But the Atlanteans are incredibly spiritual. So they're able to create incredible inventions, build incredible structures, more complex than they are even today. Because they had this direct line to God and it was not as clouded as it is today. And so you find these incredible megaliths. You find they had flying machines, they had not the exact technology we have now, but the advanced propulsion that we have now originates in the knowledge that the Atlanteans had. And we just kind of have shifted it to work with our elements and what we have going on now. But the key to the technology is not off-world, is actually the Atlantean period, in which in the post-Atlantean time, we've just changed it to work for our epoch, okay? So Atlantis was very complex. We start to get more complex forms of leadership. We start to get more complex sort of cultural groups appearing that weren't really in Lemuria. And this is what Rudolf Steiner had to say about the leaders in Atlantis, and that the leaders in Atlantis were overshadowed, or in order to be like a king in Atlantis, a priest king, you had to be integrating basically an archangel. Okay. And the archangels are in the realm beneath the archai or beneath principalities, but they have more complexity than the archai does. Just like angels are a bit more complex than archangels, and humanity is more complex than angels. Okay, so it then became necessary for archangels and spirits of Mercury to intervene in this evolution. They now had to animate and enliven what existed down here on Earth. This occurred primarily during the Atlantean era. Then spirits of Mercury, or archangels or archangeloi, descended. So they're called archangeloi, spirits of Mercury, or archangels. We're getting that planetary designation, the Greek, the classical Christian, and that's allowing us to understand this on a couple different levels. So then spirits of Mercury, archangels or archangeloi, descended. They were able to animate and inspire the physical and etheric bodies of people concerned, of the Atlanteans. Thus, among the Atlanteans, there were again such people who outwardly did not differ particularly from the others, but who were animated in their physical and etheric bodies by an archangel. And if you consider that we said yesterday that the archangels have the task of guiding entire people, you will understand that such a person who carried an archangel within could indeed readily impart the corresponding laws derived from heaven to an entire Atlantean tribe. So by having this archangel embedded in you, you were able to basically impart laws, okay, for the entire tribe that you're leading. And these laws are from heaven. So now you're providing ways of being, ways of worshiping, ways of being towards one another that are inspiring the evolution and growth of the soul. So whenever somebody is overarched by a being of the spiritual hierarchies, you're looking at an initiating impulse coming into humanity. Remember, this peaks with the incarnation of Jesus, who bears Christ. So not an archai, not an archangel, although the spiritual hierarchies do carry this through. They do allow for this to happen in a very amazing way, which is way too off the beaten path today. But you can see it culminating in Jesus. It culminates in Christ when you get the incarnation of Christ in Jesus. But you can see that it's the same pattern of, listen, in the Lemurian epoch, you had all these leaders of Lemuria that made the culture basically what it was, that led the culture. These are great initiates. These are people, and these are not people who are like, get down on the ground and like, work. These are people who are sacrificing their very essence just to serve you. Okay, this is a different dynamic than we understand today for those who do not like authority. This is people who are literally, you would cry if you saw the things they gave up in order to just have an angel enter them, to just serve you. Okay, so we need to understand this is a different dynamic than what we see today with these very dishonest, slovenly, strange leaders that only care about themselves and gathering up as much wealth as they can, and the kind of sick stuff that's going on now. It's not the original. So they're giving these laws, they're giving ways of being, and then you finally get the incarnation of the Christ in Jesus, which is the final culmination of this. And it's like it's not so much about the teachings with Jesus. Everything had already been taught. It's about the action of Jesus. It's about the activity, the ritual that he did. So you can see the entire process of humanity taking on a higher being is pivotal in initiation. It is what it is. It's part of and every person, as I mentioned, has a guardian angel. You're already engaged in this process, whether you want to admit it or not, whatever you want to call it. We can either be conscious of this process and engage in it directly, or we can just ignore it or pretend it's something else, but it's already going on and has been for millions of years. So everybody has a guardian angel. Everybody has an angel. Everybody is engaged in this process in one degree or another. There's no one alive that is not. So we can look at it in the sense of, this is the best of the best. These are the initiates. These are the ones that suffer for humanity. These are the ones that take on something greater. But we can also look at it in our own lives and say, I can see that I have a guardian angel. I can say that my energy body is united with the angels as part of the structure of the entire world. Man is united with the angels. The angels are united with the archangels. The archangels are united with the archai. The archai are united with the powers. The powers are united with the mights. The dominions and the thrones and the cherubim, the cherubim are all embedded in every hierarchy beneath it, creating the entire physical universe with their bodies. So that is how interlaced we all are. That is the process. And how we integrate all of this and become truly immortal and truly spiritualized is through the initiation, which involves us understanding these different ranks, because every rank is a quality in which heaven has created in us. This is the real stuff. This is the real teachings. This is taking the training wheels way off when we talk about this. So now he gets into comparing the Lemuria era priest kings to the Atlantean. And he says, thus the great leaders of the ancient Lemurian era, when it was still necessary to exert a much broader influence, were inspired by spirits of Venus. Those who had led smaller groups of people in the Atlantean era were inspired by archangels. What are called the priest kings of the Atlantean era? What's called the priest kings of the Atlantean era are Mayas, or illusions. They are not at all as they appear on the outside. An archangel lives in their physical and etheric bodies. He is the one who actually acts. What we would call the priest kings of the Atlantean era are Mayas. They're like an illusion. They are not at all as they appear on the outside. An archangel lives within their physical and etheric bodies. He is the one who actually acts. It is important to know that in ancient Atlantis, there were people who were actually archangels, who embodied an archangel in their physical and etheric bodies. If a clairvoyant gaze had been directed at such a person, it would indeed have seen the physical human being, and rising behind the physical human being, as if in a gigantic form, rising upward and losing itself in the indefinite regions, the archangel who inspired him. So if you were a clairvoyant, you'd see a regular person, and then you'd see the kind of guardian angel they had. And it's like this massive, huge, incredible being. And you're like, whoa, this person is an exalted initiate because look what they can sustain. Look what is part of them. They would have seen that as a great incarnation. They would have seen that as the star of Bethlehem above, this region of heaven opening up above the Christ as he is born. They would have seen a cosmic region in the sky in which this angel is united with, and then united with the priest king. We're not talking about, for the vast majority of human development, we are not talking about like an election process, a voting process. We are talking about a kind of leadership where the individual was a holy individuality. As humanity begins to become more self-aware, more individuated, we don't need that anymore. We don't need to be led by somebody who is embodying an angel. We need to become aware that we have our own angel and that we have to become conscious of what's going on in ourself, of our pain, of our trauma, of our gifts, of our basic anatomy, physically and spiritually. And we have to spiritualize ourselves, develop spiritual perception, develop imagination, inspiration, and intuition. That this is our task. And we move away from needing that tribal leader because we have to operate as a collective codependent group. We now have to realize God within ourselves, and it's that realization of God that every person eventually has that unites us in the future. So we're getting towards a future where the collectivity that we experience as a culture, as a society, is not because there is one exalted spiritual initiate that is telling you to do so that's closer to God than you, and you can see it in their aura that they are, and it's a thing of awe. We get to that point now in our development onward because people become spiritualized themselves enough to know what's right and wrong, to know what grows the soul, to know what does not, to know that we are all interconnected, no matter the race, no matter the gender, no matter whatever the heck is going on that makes us different. That at our heart and soul, we are interconnected. And when we connect in with that, and we can individuate from tribe, from compulsion, we can get to know God within ourselves, follow that, link our will with God's will. And that's when you get this higher civilization where people act morally. People are productive. People take care of the earth. People do all of these things that are healthy, steward themselves properly, steward others properly because they are God realized. We can't become God realized if we're giving our power away to someone else. So there's a distinct process in humanity where we have to no longer give our power away as we did in Lemuria, as we did in Atlantis, and as we did in the pre-incarnation existence. Because our entire anatomy, spiritually, requires something different now. And so there's this incredible pull to worship and behave tribally, especially like look at politics. I mean, people are just behaving as though they're in a political tribe. There's no critical thinking. There's no analysis. There's no ability to step out and be uncomfortable and say, maybe I need to have a different yardstick in which I'm measuring things. This is atavism, and this is something that we have to go beyond, but it is incredibly strong in every single person because look at how we operated for like so long. Most of our existence is worshipful of great individualities. So we have to develop the critical thinking, our own mind. We have to learn to contemplate. We have to learn to connect with our own will, which is united with God. We have to overcome impurities within ourselves, within our mind. We have to do this whole process in order to have a higher culture that everyone's trying to create. So it really begins with a spiritual process and not, you can't legislate it. You can't legislate morality. Morality emerges from legislation that ensures human freedom. That's it. That's all we can do from a legislative perspective is make sure that people are free to protect from tyranny, which always rears its ugly head. So only through preserving freedom through the right covenants, which are laws in a civilization, can people individuate and develop spiritually. You can't force spiritual development. You can't force morality. That comes from an inner relationship with God that cannot be forced. That belongs to the mystery of that soul alone. But through ensuring freedom, we can, which is the goal of the initiates today. That is the goal of every real initiate today. And as we'll see probably in a future video, because I won't have time today, we can get into how the great initiates operate in a post-Christ world. How does a great initiate come to be now? How do they lead? What does it look like? Okay. Okay, so now let's get a little bit into the post-Atlantean era from Rudolf Steiner here in GA 110, April 16th lecture. So in our post-Atlantean period, humanity is penetrated by angels. Now you're still going to get the overshadowing of archai, of archangels. It's just that you get this relationship with the hierarchy that evolves, and the relationship becomes a bit more complex. And every angel of the hierarchy is a little bit more complex than the last. And so by this time we have an angel. A certain kind of angel. Not all angels, and this is the thing I want to say, is not all angels are the same. So even when you're looking at, say, an angel or an archangel, those angels are not all the same kind of working in the same kind of impulse. They're all angels, but they have different tasks. They're working in different impulses, actually kind of complex. So just because someone's overshadowed by an angel, they're not all the same. Okay. All right. So this is from Rudolf Steiner, GA 110, April 16th lecture. The great leaders of the early post-Atlantean era. Okay, so early post-Atlantean era. Now remember, the post-Atlantean era is about 7,000 BC, I believe, they're talking about here probably to the incarnation, to zero. To like about that period, because once you get the incarnation, that's the turning point in time. You get the incarnation of Christ, and then humanity begins to individuate. All right. So the great leaders of the early post-Atlantean era thus had not merely their human physical body, etheric body, and astral body, but within them dwelt an angel. This enabled these great leaders to look back upon their earlier incarnations. These leaders, who were born out of the ordinary inhabitants, carried an angelic being within their physical, etheric, and astral bodies, who ensouled and interpenetrated them. They were personalities in whom an angel dwelt and gave what they needed so that they might become the teachers and leaders of men. The great founders of religions were men possessed by angels. Angels spoke through them. A human personality who, although outwardly a human being of the post-Atlantean era, actually carries within themselves a spirit of personality. Someone who is permeated by a spirit of personality right down to their physical body is called a Dhyani Buddha. Those personalities who are imbued with a spirit right down to their etheric body, who carry an archangel within themselves, are called bodhisattvas. And those who carry an angel within themselves, that is, who are imbued with a spirit in their physical body, etheric body, and astral body, are called human Buddhas. So we actually have this beautiful system of initiation, which I call initiation science, which quite literally is the most, it's like the most important thing that we can talk about. And it is how the human being attains glory. And it's right here in the condition of the spiritual bodies and exactly what kind of spiritual beings end up working through the human being. Especially we can see it in the early period of humanity before incarnation. We can see these spiritual beings literally working into the sheaths of humanity. And that's why these great religions were founded. That's why you had great genius, in part. It's not until after the incarnation. And, when even in the Greco-Roman era, you start getting this intellectualism, you start getting materialism, you start getting this individuation going on. Only now are we able to really stand back and objectively look at these things. Before the incarnation, we were all just kind of participating in it. We're just naturally seeing spirit, and we're just participating in according to the level of our ability. And now it's like significantly more chaotic, because you have a considerable amount of people who are still functioning very atavistically, even though the music has changed, even though we're in this different condition. So, so that was describing those three sections were describing how humanity operated from Lemuria into Atlantis and into mainly the pre-incarnation era of the earth. Humanity was united with different kinds of angels in their physical, astral, and etheric body, which gave them the ability to govern. They were priest kings, okay? They were not a normal person, even though they looked it. Now, this still applies today. That whole process still applies today. If you see a great initiate, they're still interlaced with very high spiritual beings, but it manifests differently today. It doesn't manifest in the same way because humanity is now individuated. And so you don't have this like leader that everyone's just worshiping because they can see this bright, brilliant aura around him. And he's, speaking, the mysteries and all of that. Now you've got this other aspect involved where now humanity is really individuated. We're all individuals, and there's a level of this that we have to kind of do for ourselves. But we still get the incarnation of great individualities. We still have individuals that are united with a solar angel or united with a different kind of angel, and they still end up being special. They still end up serving humanity, but not in exactly the same way as when humanity operated as a literal hive mind, and that was the head of the hive. So that's sort of like Rudolf Steiner has the most clear delineation of like, that initiation structure. I have yet to see a Western esotericist do that in detail like Rudolf Steiner, and I've looked for years. If somebody knows one, you can put it in the comment section. Um, but it's also talked about in the East. So that was the Western esotericism. That was the clearest I could find it explained in Western esotericism, this union with an angel, and then the fact that I'm specifically talking about the union of a leader with an angel to become a priest king that becomes a great initiate. Obviously, it's talked about in legend form, like in the Arthurian legends, in the Horus, Isis, every legend. It's talked about symbolically mostly. That's the thing. This whole thing is portrayed with the idea of, like immaculate conception of Horus, living Horus. The pharaoh is the living Horus. You have the same pattern carried out in the Arthurian legend where Arthur is conceived in that strange way. So we have it in myth, but I'm talking about actually objectively going ahead and explaining it with what is going on in the astral, etheric, and physical bodies. That is something new to our culture, which I see Rudolf Steiner doing, but I don't see it explained to that degree. I haven't found it yet, but please place it in the comments if you have. But it exists in the East, right? So these teachings were also known in Buddhism, Taoism, Indian belief systems. They all understood what a rishi was, like they understood what an Agnishivata was. They understood all of this as well. They just talked about it a little bit differently. It wasn't in the sense of initiation, but they would talk about leaders being a divine emanation. So they would talk about how a leader would come to be, and this leader would be basically a divine emanation from like a Buddha. And that's very similar, obviously, to Rudolf Steiner saying, well, there's this spiritual being that is working through and emanating into the human being. They're very similar concepts, except the East uses a little bit of a different terminology and says divine emanation. The one that comes to mind most obviously that people would know is the Dalai Lama. So the Dalai Lama is considered an emanation of an exalted individual, an exalted spiritual being. And so, or like the last Lama, sometimes I've heard as well. But there's like an exalted Buddha, and the Dalai Lama is basically like an incarnation or an emanation, or has the Kaya, Kaya, the Kaya body of that being. So you're looking at an exalted spiritual being that is emanating into an individuality, making them the Dalai Lama. And this is why they'll look for certain birthmarks and they'll look for certain traits, because when the etheric body is being emanated into by a high angel, or what they would call a Buddha, then it's like that can cause the same certain marks to appear on the body, because the etheric body is the template. And so, but they would call that a Buddha. And whereas Rudolf Steiner is associating it with a spiritual, there's a little bit of, the thing about the East and the West is they cover the same stuff, but they don't talk about it in exactly the same way. But if you look at it, the structure is there. So you're looking at the Dalai Lama being an emanation of a very high spiritual individuality called a Buddha. But you're also looking at the reality that even a human being can become a Buddha as well. Buddhaship is a certain level of spiritual attainment, right? Okay, so, and the Lama's leadership and authority is derived because he is the emanation of this individuality. Now, I mean, again, you're looking at something that would have reached its peak, to be honest, probably, thousands and thousands of years ago, which is why in this day and age, you do get some weird associations with like the modern Dalai Lama with like three-letter agencies. Um, because this structure really doesn't apply in modern times, humanity isn't looking to be initiated by some great individuality anymore. It's a complete inner process, and all of the power is now within the human being. So we're not looking for any external spiritual forces from a shaman in the way that we would have before the incarnation. Because after the incarnation of Christ, all that spiritual power happens from within humanity. And that's why I talk about it so much, is that we really have to understand the shift that's happened on the earth since the incarnation. You really can't, it's not being a Jesus freak or something to acknowledge the inward direction of the energy body and consciousness after the incarnation of God and man. Right? It's an actual technical thing that happened that changed the energy of the earth and the human being. So now everything is basically within the individual. All the processes are internal, and it's a little bit of a different ball game now. But you still see these different initiation systems that are really functioning more so. They're not completely useless or something. I adore Buddhism. I actually really enjoy Buddhism. I enjoy Eastern esotericism a lot. And I see the beauty in the practices that they've created and given humanity. But where I would disagree is I don't agree with this passing down of qualities from a shaman to a student, or this is no longer effective because everybody already has everything within them now. We already have all that. All of those individual initiates and what they were giving has already been given. It's already integrated and latent and functioning and automatic in the human being's energy body. So now we're looking to graduate, basically. We're looking to spiritualize, having received everything we possibly can from these initiates in that external way, in which we were more like feeding on the hierarchies. We were more like babies nursing from the hierarchies, receiving things from great initiates, receiving things from shaman and angels. We were just kind of absorbing, right? Now we're to become radiant. So we don't do anything really externally in that sense. It all comes from internal development now, total embodiment, even rather than disembodiment. So it's important to draw that distinction. Okay, so we can see this idea still existing in the tradition of the Dalai Lama and other traditions that look for these emanations. And to be honest, these emanations still happen. Like I said, you're still going to get great incarnations. You're still going to get fantastic leaders. You're still going to get fantastic spiritual teachers and great initiates, but they operate in the world and in humanity a little bit differently. All right, I just want to take a second and remind you guys that I do have a website, and that is ggyoung.com. And on that website, I have a lot of stuff going on. So I have forums, and you can talk to people about this topic, about any topic you want. There's a forum for everything. I have also hundreds and hundreds of hours of live Q&As where we cover so many different topics. And I also have classes. My most recent class is my Guardian Angel and Spirit Guides class, which I get into angels and demons, the energy body, how the angels interlaced with you, a spiritual awakening and its effect on your consciousness, how to develop a relationship with the angel. I cover all of that. There's a huge Q&A we just did last week. I think we went for like 4.5 hours, answered every question I could. And so if you're interested in going a lot deeper, then please consider supporting me there. that's just what allows me to do all this free stuff here. I'm completely supported by my patrons on my website. So if you enjoy this, please consider going over there and becoming a member or making a donation. That just allows me to continue to do this. Okay. So what exactly, let's just get a little bit more clear on this early period of humanity when we have these external initiate leaders that lead the whole tribe. What exactly would they do? Okay, so they would guide people to different places on the earth. So they would lead these great migrations, especially in the Lemurian period. What happens with earthly development is there's certain times of the earth where certain groups of people need to develop on certain places because the earth is like a microcosm of the entire cosmos, and so is man. So we're always dealing with like a microcosm, macrocosm kind of thing. And so when the cosmos goes through various different shifts and twists and turns, humanity and the earth will as well. And so you used to see these, we still see them now, but these great migrations that would happen in Lemuria and Atlantis. And they would be led by Ra. They'd be led by the sun god, the sun king. And they were different words, obviously, but usually the person who was the leader was associated with the sun, right? And that was the highest exalted leader. The priest king would also establish laws. So every once in a while, you would get a really great initiate that would incarnate. It wouldn't be all the time. You'd go through dark periods where there was no great incarnation to lead. And humanity would be led into all these weird, dark, degenerate things because they have to confront their shadow, right? But then when a great leader would incarnate, that leader would essentially reinterpret the laws. Think about like Moses or something. Like you're reinterpreting the laws of that age for where consciousness is now, because the issue is that you have humanity evolving in this huge swath of time in these grand epochs with all these different civilizations rising and falling. And that whole time, human consciousness is becoming more complex, and we're challenged to develop certain capacities while releasing certain perspectives in order to develop further. And so humanity gets really, really confused between what do we hold on to from the past? We can't get rid of everything. There's certain things that are timeless that we need. And then what do we develop? So people get very, very confused as to, what should we let go of? What tradition is no longer serving humanity? What ideology doesn't serve the evolution of the soul anymore? What needs to be upgraded? And so you'd have these incredible priest kings, these great initiates that would come in with these powerful angels behind them, standing behind them, the power of heaven, basically. And they would come in and they would reinterpret and upgrade the laws and upgrade the culture so that it would work with where humanity was at the time. So cleansing the degeneracy from the culture, but then also making sure that humanity was centered in the right organs and the right centers within themselves. And then they would basically establish a kingdom, establish a culture, and usually eventually it would erode, but you'd have amazing industry, you'd have incredible creativity, you'd have high point usually after a great initiate would come. Or at least you'd have some preservation if there was a great initiate. The leader would also establish customs to support the soul development of the era. So like Rudolf Steiner said, you're getting, with a great initiate, you're getting incredible spiritual teachers too. You're getting these incredible individuals who not only give you, timeless spiritual teachings, but are also giving you ideas on how to govern, ideas on how to lead the entire population so that the average human being can actually grow, can actually evolve, you know. So they're ensuring the physical and spiritual destiny of humanity is unfolding properly. They point out inversions, and this would be like an inversion is often, looking at it esoterically, it's when an older way of human functioning, an atavistic aspect, keeps perpetuating into the modern era. And if that atavistic, like that atavistic element continues and pushes into modern times, then the current faculties and capacities will not develop because there's this influx of the archaic human being, that these impulses from the archaic era of humanity, these perspectives, and they end up competing with the modern human being. And so these higher capacities won't operate. You won't get the clarity of perception if you're constantly trying to regress into an earlier condition. And so the initiate of the age, or a great leader that has this angel working through them, they will be able to clearly delineate away the degeneracy and the inversions and set the culture on the right direction. And don't forget that these people also have a spiritual power. They have a spiritual influence to them. People can often sense the angel in there. That can sometimes cause great repulsion. Like for somebody who is horribly possessed, that may scare them. They may not like the fact that this higher angel is working through an individual because they're possessed. But people who are in prayer, people who are working upon themselves to evolve, they may recognize the feeling of Christ, the feeling of glory in this person as well. And the most important thing, perhaps, to recognize one of these people is that when you have somebody that's actually a true leader, a true priest king, especially in that era, but a true initiate, this is actually one of the things that continues into our age, is that the king, the leader, will take on the sorrow of his tribe. He'll take on the sorrow and the problems and the pain of his people. And he does this in the sense that he actually takes it into his body. He actually takes it into his heart. He actually takes it into his mind. And he and the angel will work on this, work on creating solutions, but he actually takes on the suffering of the public. And he does this in a completely renounced position. So he takes nothing for himself. So the actual position of a leader is total renunciation. And if a person can't really renounce, then they're not in the position to lead. And that's why we see so many problems, is because people see politics and leadership as an opportunity to create some kind of dynasty, to enrich themselves, to consolidate power, which is a total inversion of what this structure originally was. It is a husk at this point that different power systems are using and perverting for their own benefit, which is the actual inversion of how the system of governance and leadership, what it actually was, to the point that people hate it and don't even know what to do anymore. Well, I think the first part is actually remembering how this all got started and what a leader is, what a leader used to be, and then seeing the husk that we're functioning in today. So it was a requisite, like you would never see, like in these higher ages where these actual initiates were operating, you would never see like a leader trying to further his family through taking money from the public and like scamming people, or these different backdoor kickback deals that happens in Congress. You would never see it. because it was just, if you were doing that, you wouldn't have an angel above you. Like the angel would consider you to be a pervert. You'd be a perverted human soul to think that. And so an angel like that would never even seek to work through you. You got something else working through you at that point. Look how far we have fallen, ladies and gentlemen. You know, so, but like I said, and we'll probably in the future, if you guys like this one, we can go further with it and maybe talk about the Michaelites and how the solar angels and the Sun King would work in the future. But so you have a complete selfless service. You have the individual willing to, it's not like they have to live in total poverty and be, renounced in every way you can imagine. But they have to be willing to die for their station at the very least. So this is the thing, is that a real initiate, a real leader does not fear death. Because deep down in their being, they know that if they are to die in the process of doing their mission, that it will only augment their mission. Right? Think about like JFK, right? He's murdered arguably by the deep state, arguably by the three-letter agency's deep state. And his life and his perspectives and his image becomes larger than any president imaginable. Whether you like him or not, or you agree with him, not what I'm talking about. That whole image becomes emblematic, and it is coming back today to haunt the deep state. It's coming back now to haunt the people who took his life 80 years ago. So a real leader that and again, it's not about having a perfect person. Again, to have an angel overshadow you in our day and age, in the post-Christ era, it's not about you being a perfect person today. Okay? It's about having certain qualities and courage developed. But when you think about different people who have also been martyred by, for their cause, beyond someone that's very obvious and a public leader like JFK, what ends up happening is they don't fear it, because they have such a strong connection to their angel and to God. And they know that if they are to pass, that their cause and their essence will become even bigger than it ever could be in life. They kind of revert the energy. It's like, if you strike me down, I will rise, more powerful than before. This is something that a real leader understands. And so a real leader can never truly be blackmailed, not in the way that we see today, because there is this different quality to them, having this angel within them. Again, not perfect people, very flawed people, but there's just something else within them. There's an edge, there's a quality there that is working within them that gives them this extra little bit, gives them a certain morality, gives them a certain mission. Not perfect, but there's this little extra something there. Okay? We're already at 2 hours. So I think we will end it here. Maybe we'll do, I was going to get into more on priest kings and celestial imagery. What do you guys think? Should I go a little bit longer? More on priest kings and the celestial energy. And I wanted to briefly touch on the king's court and the people surrounding the king or surrounding the initiate, and then also bloodlines and divine right. So I think I'll maybe do one more section, and then maybe we can pick this up on another episode of Occulted. Okay. So one of the really incredible things about the identification of a priest king was in earlier periods, how they would communicate that was how Rudolf Steiner was saying it. He was associating it with certain planetary spheres. So Rudolf Steiner says spirits of Mercury, spirits of Venus, spirits of the moon. And he'll sometimes do this cosmic language, this cosmic orientation, and he'll say, this human being has an angel united with their soul, which is stretching up to the moon. It's stretching up to Venus. It's stretching up to Mercury. Now, why this is significant is that in earlier periods, especially in the inner circles of the ancient mystery schools, they would actually track people's births. And they would know when a very exalted soul was going to incarnate based on the orientation of the sky. And certain souls that had the ability to make a big impact in the culture were associated with certain star systems and certain planets, which was basically like their incarnational path. So when they would pass away, they would basically move through the planetary spheres and then sometimes even briefly exit that paradigm sometimes. And before coming back down, they would even move through some greater systems. The higher initiates would. And these different stars and these different spheres had different qualities. They would be different gifts that the soul would have developed to give to humanity. Now the sun king is typically the most exalted, right? But then you'd have other kinds of angels and other kinds of planetary influences that would influence art, that would influence engineering, that would influence these different things that come from different places in heaven where those qualities are developed. And so this was always tracked through the stars and planets. Now today, that information is taken literally, materially, and people think that they're literally an alien coming from Sirius, or they're literally an alien coming from the Pleiades, or they're literally an alien coming from Venus. That's not describing physical entities. If people want to talk about there being physical aliens, that's fine. I'll be willing to believe in physical aliens when I see one. I have no problem with that. What my issue is that people are taking these classical initiation teachings that describe the lineage of a soul, the passage of a soul through heaven, particularly these great initiates associated with Venus, associated with Mercury, associated with Sun, Sirius, Arcturus, Pleiades. And they're saying this is a physical alien. They go back into classical descriptions of souls, human souls, passing through the stars before they're born. And they're reinterpreting that stuff as ancient aliens. The reason why the temples are lined up with star systems is because of the human soul. It has literally nothing to do with spaceships and aliens. So what's happening is the culture is needing to understand initiation science, because for the first time, we're not just absorbing our initiation from a shaman or from a lama or from a priest. We can't just absorb it from their body anymore because they're the mediator through an angel. We have to develop that within ourselves. That stuff's already been done. We've already got it. We can only do that if we understand what the cosmos is to the soul and what the planets are to the soul. Astrology has preserved a great deal of this, but there's also levels of this that directly deal with initiation science, that directly deal with the creation of the earth, the creation of materiality. That's how deep this goes. And so the priest kings, like when you hear like Quetzalcoatl, and Quetzalcoatl says, I am associated with Venus. What does Jesus say in the Bible? I am the morning star. Why is Lucifer and Jesus associated with different planetary spheres? Why is Venus associated with Jesus? You know, why are different gods associated with different planets? Why is the mother associated with Earth and the moon? This is actually talking about something really important about our soul and the evolution of our soul. Okay, and as long as we think that this is like beings in spaceships, we're kind of screwed. Again, beings on other planets, physically, sure. Show me and I'll believe you. Show me the alien on the other planet, I'll believe you. But don't go back into initiation literature. Don't go back into the Bible. Don't go back into the Bhagavad Gita. Don't go back into the Sumerian text. Don't go back into all of these texts that are describing great initiates and their soul passage through the heavens and their association with planetary spheres. Don't use that to support aliens. If you want to say that aliens exist, that's fine. I'll believe you. I'll walk that path with you. I'm not against that if you can prove it. But don't go back into spiritual texts like Ancient Aliens, like Eric von Daniken, like Sitchin, and interpret them materialistically and tell people that that's a physical alien. They begin to believe that, and then they don't understand the process of death and rebirth that is actually being described. It's just false. It's not like, oh, well, that's your interpretation. That's not what that document means. At some point, that has to be stated. It's not what that document means. It's talking about the soul. Okay? Again, if people want to believe that there is an alien on the moon or on Mars or wherever they are, that's fine. Enjoy, have a good time. But don't use spiritual texts that are talking about angels and the movement of the soul in the cosmos to support that, because it doesn't work. Because the ancients are not talking about that. They're talking about the passage of the soul through the stars and certain levels of initiation and souls coming in that have certain degrees of talents and skills from certain places in the cosmos, like Sirius or the Pleiades or Arcturus or whatever. They're not talking about beings and ships at all. You want to believe that, you prove that. You prove that without using those texts. Okay, then I'll believe you for sure. I have no problem with that. Just don't use these initiation texts and these teachers and what they've left and distort it and pervert it into a materialist mess so it's unrecognizable for the next generations. Then we're going to have a problem. Okay? All right. So you'll see people, these souls, and they'll be associated with like Pleiades, Sirius, Venus, the morning star, Arcturus. These are levels of initiation. These are kinds of souls that are coming in. It's describing their spiritual body. And we can get more into this in the future, but what we need to understand right now is that that's what that's talking about. Quetzalcoatl being associated with Venus is not saying I am a Venusian. I'm a Nordic Venusian Pleiadian. That's not what Quetzalcoatl's saying. That's not what Jesus is saying when they're talking about Venus. They're talking about a level of initiation that they have that is visible in their etheric body that we've always tracked through the heavens and the process of death and rebirth until modern times, when we lose the teachings of incarnation because of dogmatic Christianity. We now get this stuff because we still crave it, we still want to know, but we don't have the structure for it. Okay? And in earlier periods, and this is the same for every culture. Like, we're using priest king and stuff, but like, even if you went into like Native American tribes, they would view their chief as having supernatural powers. If you were to look at how they actually viewed their chief, you could see these feathers and these like the rays streaming off of him. You know, if you went to druidic pagan times, you would find the leader would be considered a great incarnation. Again, Egypt is probably the most obvious of this, with literally the pharaoh being living Horus. He's an emanation of the sun god. He's an emanation of the solar angel. He's a living emanation, the Dalai Lama, a living emanation of the Buddha, of a Buddha, a divine Buddha. So this is actually the structure of what would make somebody a leader. And in our time, again, things are a little bit different because we don't have that same track of evolution that we did for millions of years, if you count Lemuria, where human beings kind of had to exist in this natural hierarchy, not in an authoritarian, sick way, but every soul would be organized according to its potential, which would be seen in the aura, based on how that soul passed through heaven. Exalted souls would be in leadership positions or close to, and then souls that were not as exalted and were newer or developing slower would be in different positions. And the ones in higher positions actually sought with total joy to uplift those beneath them. So being in authority, being in leadership in these higher times meant you were in total service and adored the people that you were serving, right? So real different perspective. We get this process of individuation that sets in with the incarnation, and everything shifts inward. And we're not really absorbing all of our stuff from a shaman anymore. You don't have to absorb anything from anyone else. It's all within you now. Everything that you need to grow, every power that you need to transform is within you. It didn't used to be like that. 3,000 years ago, it wasn't like that, actually, which is why you hear things being described so differently, why cultures are so different, the further you go back, is we didn't have the ability to transform from within ourselves. Everything was kind of shared and passed through great initiates down. So now we have the ability to do that within ourselves. Now we have the human being is able to, from within our own heart, evolve independently, no longer in a group, and we're able to either follow something or not. And actually, the highest levels of development today are to connect with your own soul and to connect with God within you and figure out how to live a life that is united with God, but also honoring your mission, right? So we're now moving into this different time where we still have great incarnations, but we have a choice whether or not to recognize them. I mean, look at the incarnation of Jesus, and to a certain extent, Gautama Buddha as well. The further we get in development in this post-Atlantean age, in which Buddha is also a part of the post-Atlantean epoch, they're not the same kind of initiate, to be clear. Jesus and Buddha are not the same kind of initiate. But you get this rejection of these divine souls that come down to the earth, which wouldn't have happened in Lemuria. That wouldn't have happened in the earlier parts of Atlantis, especially. You wouldn't reject a great incarnation because you would clairvoyantly see their incredible energy body. And you would be like, wow, this is amazing. I want to learn and absorb the burn off from this great entity, But now, today, one of the differences is that we can have a great incarnation and we can reject it. Look at Jesus. Jesus was murdered because the world was individuating and atavistic in tendency. They rejected the Christ. Many people have rejected incredible spiritual leaders even before that. And after, there have been incredible spiritual individualities that came here and served, and nobody knows their name. Or people know who they are and they don't understand them at all. They don't get it. They don't see the value in it. Why? Because we no longer live in the era where the great incarnations are obvious to us. And these incredible souls come and they go, and a lot of them nobody even really knows. And a lot of the people who people think are these great incarnations, these great heroes of humanity, are nothing more than degenerates. They have no spiritual development at all, to be frank. Very little. The level of spiritual development that they have does not equal the amount of attention that they have. So we're now living in this weird upside down because today it is up to every human being to choose the path of spiritual life from within their own being, and to make that hard decision of, will I choose spiritual life and individuation, or will I choose to fall back asleep and just go with whatever the culture says, whatever society says, thinking maybe in the back of your mind that there is some great initiate leading that impulse, like it would have been. So now you can have presidents, religious leaders, celebrities that are occupying a high station in culture that are spiritual infants and cannot impart anything real to the culture, only degenerated, actually. But that's an image of where we are as a people. It's an image of our own shadow. It's an image also in a lot of ways of how far we've come, of our need to confront evil in ourselves and in the world. But if we can understand this pattern, we can begin to restore some kind of order to society that has some kind of moral impulse. Because right now, and we'll close this how we began it, right now, we are facing a time in which we have to have a good understanding of, from now, particularly 2027 to 2033, we have to get our ducks in order, okay? Because this is the time in which the technate is going to attempt to completely, officially, and totally control humanity. This is the time span. And they want to do it through America, because America is the leading civilization of this age, of currently. If they don't get America, if they can't capture it and destroy it, and destroy the spirit of freedom that comes through America, whether you like America or not, there is something different about the founding documents of America to other nations. Now, again, we're not following that in this country. There's a difference between a country having a covenant and founding documents that are for freedom, and the people being able to live up to those documents, the people being able to live up to the freedom that was envisioned for us. So different things. You're not guaranteed freedom, even if it's in your documents, even if it's in your founding charters. You're not guaranteed it. It's something that you have to constantly interpret and maintain and fight for. But there's something a little bit different in the founding documents of America that isn't quite in other documents in the country, and in particular the West. This is why other countries use the American Bill of Rights and founding documents as their structure. There's a reason for the impulse that comes through here. Again, not saying America is a perfect country, not saying it has a perfect history. America is people, good, bad, ugly, and everything in between. I'm talking about the founding potential of the documents, okay? the covenant that can come through this country. We have to think like that. So if that is destroyed, it will have, if it's destroyed by an upcoming technate that uses the innovation of technology and things like the Golden Dome, space colonization, which is really about creating intense surveillance and energy waves that permeate the Earth to make it so it's a different body, essentially through what they can radiate from Moon and Mars to the Earth. They need America to really do it. Okay, they need to take control of America to really completely take control of the world. If they don't get America, which is our best option, then they will split apart and they will take over other countries in the world. They'll split apart, and some will go to South America. Some will go to a certain region of Europe and a few other places, and their influence will be fragmented and limited. So they're going to fight like heck to get this final control of America in 2028. But if it can be rebuffed and we can put these people who want the technate, okay, if we can rebuff that, expose those crimes, then we'll get a lesser version of it, which will serve humanity greatly, and it'll serve your children and the future generations greatly. Again, we're not saying that you can't have a computer, okay? We're not saying you can't have your AI. We're saying that there's a way to steward this so that these things are sober and meaningful tools. And there's a way to steward this thing so in 10 years from now, human beings can't even think their own thought anymore. Okay? That's what we're looking at. I wish it wasn't so, but it is. This is my personal read on it. You can let me know yours in the comments. So I will leave you here today. I think 2 hours is pretty good. I do have some more stuff we can get into. Let me know in the comments if you want me to keep going on this topic. I'd like to get more into the sort of court of the priest king. So looking at the nobility and what that used to represent, you know, the idea of even Arthur's round table and the knights that would be surrounding him, this idea of nobility, the kind of burn off from the priest king that would have gone into his certain individualities. We can get into the real teaching of bloodlines and divine right, because what you're seeing with like monarchies today is not divine right. Like, we're not looking at like people who are in a monarchy now. That's just totally birthright. That's just people who have happened to inherit the throne after years of bloody war. And like, divine right meant that you had an angel, probably the highest spiritual angel, working through you. That's what divine right was. And so there's all these mysteries around the bloodlines and divine right, what that really means, and hereditary. We can get into that in a future one. And I'd also like to maybe get into, I would say, Archangel Michael, the Michaelites, a little bit more into the Pharaoh, stuff like that. So you guys let me know in the comment section if you're interested. We can maybe do that again, do this one again. You guys, thank you so much. Don't forget that I have a website, ggyoung.com/premium. And I cover all of these topics and more. I do live Q&As where I take your questions. I usually do like 4 hours. So just being a member, you can have like an hour of extra content every week more. There's forums. There's like, we watch fun movie nights together. It's a really incredible group of people. There's psychic forums. You can develop your little psychic abilities from it. There's a free course that you get when you sign up as well called The Four Bodies, where I describe the physical body, the astral body, the etheric body, and the higher self, and how they become glorified. So you get a free course with it. You get a discount on any course that I do. So you can get a discount on psychic business development, and you can get a discount also on the Guardian Angel and Spirit Guides course if you're a member. Sign up for my announcements letter where I will let you know when I'm going to be speaking again, if I have any classes or workshops coming up. And that just allows me to let you know directly when I'm going to be live here, because I know that people don't always get notifications and all of that. So, you guys, thank you so much for joining me. It's my absolute pleasure to be here with you. And I will see you in our next stream. All my love your way.